Hey, I'm Lauren. I'm going to talk to you today about one of my favorite things, which is shoulders. I shared this video on Instagram recently and people were really into it. And I had a couple of requests for tutorials to kind of go over what's happening and how to do it. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. So this exercise that I shared, I was doing it in one specific way because at the time I was preparing to perform an act and I was using it to warm up my shoulder for a sequence that I was doing in the act. And if you watch that sequence, you'll notice that my shoulder and my arm are going through the same pathway when I'm on the apparatus as when I have my hand in the band. Now, this pathway can actually be done in kind of a few different ways. So I am going to share a few variations with you and talk about how I would use them to introduce some concepts in classes, as well as how to execute it safely, because this exercise, while really good feeling if you're doing it well and if your shoulder can support what you're doing, also could be like kind of problematic if you're doing it without really understanding what you're trying to do, or if you're doing it in a way that your shoulder isn't strong enough to support, because we really are working in an end range of motion here. And our end range of motion is always where we're going to be the weakest and most vulnerable. So especially for aerialist acrobats, people who are doing extreme things at their end range of motion, it's always really important to train strength and control there. So this exercise can help you with that process, but if you're already injured, it can also make your injury a lot worse. So as a preface, I will say it is important to never, ever, ever, ever push through pain, right? If you are doing something and it hurts, and there's a difference between pain and some intensity, this might feel a little like, woo, but if it is actually hurting you, if you're feeling stabbing, pinching, burning, anything like that, like, don't do it. Or change your range of motion to a range where you're not feeling pain. Yeah? So let's start by just taking a look at this exercise. I have a band and it's mounted pretty high above my head. The height is absolutely going to make a difference in how this feels. So when our arm is up over our head, the higher up the band is, the more it's going to be lifting you up and offering support and decompression. However, once our arm starts going down behind our back, the more you're going to have to work. However, if the band is lower, if it's like below head height, you're going to be having to work really, really hard in this range, while this range is going to be easier and more supported, right? So figuring out what band height is going to work best for you and what band tension, right? If you have a heavier band or a light band, is going to be really important. You also might want to do just a section of it, and I'm going to break that down for you. So the exercise as I was doing it in the video that I shared looks like this. I have my hand all the way over my head with my elbow bent and pointed forward. I'm in external rotation when I'm here. My arm reaches up and I start to rotate my hand, and I'm trying to turn my hand all the way until my palm turns up towards the ceiling. And my body's going to have to start turning, where I'm turning back to bring my arm across my low back. And as I do that, my elbow bends and my arm ends up across my back. When I'm here in this position, we might add a little side bend, a little lateral flexion, which is going to feel pretty good. And this is a position for our shoulder and ribs that's pretty complementary. There also might be a little bit of extension, me turning into my arm. When I'm ready to come out, I'm going to start turning my body back to face forward. And as I do that, my arm is going to start extending back to straight. And it's going to start lifting up. And then this is the part that's often the trickiest for many people. I've got to bring my arm back in front of me. So I'm going to think about starting with my elbow, that it's trying to bend forward and push in front of me. Now, in the clip that I shared, I continued then bringing my arm all the way over my head and turning my body as my arm comes in front of me. And I will share this from the other angle. And here, I'm in another kind of side bendy position. So what that part looks like, where you can actually see what's happening, if my arm is up and I've got my elbow pointed in front of me, my arm crosses over my head, and I'm turning my body again. So now the front of my body is facing my arm, and I can find my side bend or lateral flexion. And again, this rib cage position and arm position goes really well together. This is a complementary position. When my arm's in front of me, I might be a little bit more flexed, right? I'm always kind of turning into my arm. So a little bit more flexion of the spine. Whereas when my arm was behind me, I was in a little bit more extension of the spine. And then my arm comes back up. And I go under with my head as my elbow points forward. So I mentioned that elbow, bringing the arm back in front, is often a super tricky thing for people to figure out. That is often kind of where we're the most vulnerable in the shoulder, because we're moving from having our arm behind us in extension to in front of us in flexion, right? Through this rotational pathway at this highest end range of motion, right? And that is a place where most people are not strong and are pretty vulnerable. So there's this PT exercise that you might have done before, or at least seen, that's actually pretty helpful in understanding what kind of action we're trying to find in the shoulder and the upper arm as we do this. So I'm going to do this standing facing the wall. Generally, you're going to see it laying down on your belly with your face down. But just for ease of not having to fuck with my camera, we're going to do it this way. So you would be laying down with your arms over your head and your fingertips either pointing at each other with your thumbs up. You could also do it palm down. This is the way that feels best for me, right? But you do whatever feels good for you. And if you've done this with your physical therapist, right, you know. So from here, I'm going to start lifting my hands up and thinking about reaching my thumbs out and back. And as my hand moves, my upper arm is rotating, right? So here, as my hand lifts, this part is rotating in, and my scapula is kind of scooping around to the side. So if you've heard the term scap wrap before, that's basically what we're working on, right? So this kind of wrapping around, the scapula scoops around, the humerus is rotating in to external rotation, right? And that looks an awful lot like this, yeah? So when this motion is happening, my scapula and my humerus need to be working together in rhythm to keep the humerus fully supported in the joint, the socket, which is on the scapula, right? So if you're doing this and you're feeling like a lot of pinching right here in the front of your shoulder, or if you're feeling like this just doesn't know how to move, you might try having your arm come out a little bit lower. That might look a little bit something like this, where I'm bringing my elbow forward, but I'm keeping it a little bit more at shoulder height rather than allowing my elbow to come up above my shoulder, right? This is all about what is our active functional range of motion? Where do I have strength and control? And if you don't have it up here and it feels bad, then don't force yourself to do it. You could jack your shit up. Nobody wants that. So I'm going to think about my scapula kind of scooping around. I'm thinking about turning my upper arm in, and I'm thinking about reaching my elbow forward. Then if we're taking it behind the back, which is our other vulnerable place, right? My arm extends out, and now I have to fully internally rotate, right? So that means my hand has to keep turning until my palm has rotated all the way up towards the ceiling. And if I rotate my hand all the way and then I try to keep turning it, my elbow is naturally going to want to bend and my arm is going to want to come behind my back. It's just all going to happen, right? Just keep turning your hand and you're going to end up here. And when we come out, we let the arm extend, and then we have to unwind the arm. So from my palm facing up towards the ceiling, an internal rotation, I'm going to start externally rotating. So I turn my hand to face away, and I keep turning basically until my palm faces the ceiling again. And I scoop my elbow forward. And there we are. So here are 3 little chunks of things that I use to teach people specific pathways in classes. So I do a lot of stuff that involves turning under the arm. So the act of being able to come under and come back, right, is absolutely something that I use this exercise to teach people. Something else that this is very similar to is flamenco grip, right? So there's 2 different ways that my arm could go behind me in this position. I could think about it going straight up and circling back, or I could let my head tip to the side, and that's going to look a little bit more like this. I go straight up, and then my head starts to drop to the side, my arm reaches up, and then I'm starting to turn. And then I come back, right? That's a lot like flamenco grip. I've got to reach my arm up and turn it back to get my hand on the pole. My body tips away. And then once I've got my hand on the pole, I want to bring my arm back, keeping the apparatus in my armpit. I'm going to scoop my arm back behind the apparatus and bring myself back upright. That is one of our pathway options with flamenco grip. And the last thing that I use this general pathway for is teaching turning into an arm breaker. And if I'm teaching just the arm breaker component, I feel like this is much better with the band at a lower level, around shoulder rib height, right? And now we're going to hold the band. And I'm going to start turning my arm, right? So we've still got to go into that internal rotation because arm breaker is an internally rotated position. So my hand starts to turn back, but I've got to let my whole body turn until I've rotated into my arm. And then I'm going to unwind my body, and I'll do it on the other side. So my arm is in front of me. I'm turning my palm away. And then my whole body has to start rotating in And I'm keeping a little bit of a pull, like I'm trying to pull my elbow away from my side. And then my body is going to rotate back. When we're doing moves like arm breaker, often our hand is the fixed point. So when we're waving our arm around in space, right, our body's the fixed point and our arm is moving around it, right? Here's that same pathway. But once we get on the apparatus, our hand becomes the fixed point and our body has to move relative to the hand. And that's what this drill can be really useful for. This is also a much less loaded place for your shoulder in this position. And like I said, this can be a vulnerable position for the shoulder. This is our end range of extension and internal rotation. So it's another place where you likely haven't spent a lot of time weight bearing in your life. So doing this with less load and less intensity in the line of pull can be a much easier way to kind of introduce yourself to the position. Whoosh, whoosh. So that's what I got for you today. Hopefully that was helpful. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments and I'll definitely get back to you. I'm also writing a blog post getting into some further details about the mechanics and looking at how this pathway applies to different skills that you might do. And I'm going to link to that in the description. So if you want to, get even nerdier than we already have, then you're going to want to go and check that out. So thanks for joining me. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Bye.